I spent 30 years building memories in that lake cabin, only to find a rusted U-Haul parked on my prize hydrangeas on a Tuesday morning. My name is Emily Stevens. I am 65, widowed for 5 years, and perfectly capable of handling my own life. I had driven out to the lake to prepare the property for a new set of long-term renters. Instead, I found my daughter-in-law's parents, unloading a massive leather recliner into my screened porch. I parked my SUV at the edge of the gravel driveway, leaving the engine running. Sarah, my son David's wife, was a woman who viewed my existence mostly as a walking bank account. Her parents, Greg and Susan, shared that exact philosophy. Greg noticed my car and strolled over, wiping sweat from his forehead. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed that I was there. "Morning, Emily." Greg grinned, leaning against my driver's side window. "You didn't need to drive all the way out here to welcome us." I stared at the boxes stacked near my front door. "Why is there a trailer in my driveway?" "Greg." He chuckled, waving a hand toward the open door. "Relax. We're just settling in for a few months until we figure out our next housing situation." In my house, that's when Susan walked out, holding one of my husband's vintage coffee mugs. She took a sip and smirked. I will never forget what she said next. It was the exact moment my patience completely evaporated. "She gave us the code." Susan laughed, referring to Sarah. "This cabin will belong to her anyway. We're just getting a head start on enjoying it." A younger woman might have screamed or cried. I didn't do either. I just rolled up my window, put the car in reverse, and backed out of the driveway. They thought I was retreating. They had no idea what was coming hours later. I drove exactly 2 miles down the road and pulled into the parking lot of a local diner. I ordered a black coffee and pulled a notepad from my purse. Panic is useless. Strategy gets results. David had given Sarah the keypad code. That was the only logical explanation. My son, bless him, hated conflict so much he would hand over his own arm if it meant avoiding an argument with his wife. Sarah liked to control everything, and she clearly decided my empty lake house was the perfect solution for her parents' housing problems. They actually believed that because David was my only child, this property was already theirs to distribute. They saw an older widow and assumed I would just roll over, maybe write an angry email, and eventually accept my fate. They didn't understand the difference between being quiet and being weak. I drank my coffee and made a short, precise list of things I owned. I owned the house. I owned the land. I owned the utility accounts, the internet connection, and the gate access. I didn't need to argue with Greg and Susan. I didn't need to stand in the yard trading insults with people who drank from my dead husband's favorite mug. If they wanted to occupy my cabin, I would simply remove everything that made the cabin habitable. I finished my coffee, tipped the waitress, and drove to the hardware store. I purchased 3 heavy-duty padlocks, a thick steel chain, and a specialized wrench. I also bought a roll of heavy plastic sheeting and some duct tape. I paid for the items in cash and loaded them into my trunk. The morning sun was rising higher, promising a blisteringly hot afternoon. Perfect. I checked my watch. It was barely 10 o'clock. Greg and Susan were probably unpacking their clothes into my dressers right now, feeling victorious. If they wanted to live in my cabin, they were going to have to survive my rules. Before returning to the cabin, I made a quick stop at the local utility office in town. The clerk recognized me. My husband and I had paid bills there for decades. I smiled warmly and placed my ID on the counter. "Hi, Brenda. I need to request an immediate emergency shutoff for my lake property," I explained. "We have a severe plumbing issue, and the electrical panel needs a total replacement. It's a major fire hazard." Brenda typed rapidly on her keyboard. "Oh my goodness, Emily. Of course, I can cut the power from the grid right now. Do you want me to send a water tech out?" "No need," I replied. "I'll shut the water main off myself today. Just keep the electricity off until I personally come back to authorize the reconnection." Done? She nodded. I walked out to my car, pulled out my phone, and logged into my internet provider's app. 2 taps later, the cabin's high-speed Wi-Fi was completely disconnected. I drove back to the property. The U-Haul was still there. As I pulled up, the front door swung open. Greg walked out, looking confused and slightly sweaty. The summer heat was already pushing past 85 degrees. "Hey!" he called out, jogging toward my car. "The power just went out. Did you do something?" I grabbed my new hardware bag and stepped out. "Oh, the power. Yes, the grid is off. The cabin is undergoing major emergency renovations starting today." "Renovations?" Greg frowned. "What are you talking about? We just moved our food into the fridge." "That was a poor decision," I stated calmly, walking past him toward the side of the house. I found the water main valve near the foundation. Using my new wrench, I shut it off completely. Then I looped the heavy steel chain around the pipe and secured it with a padlock. Let's see how much they loved their new inheritance in the dark. I walked back to the front porch. Susan was standing near the screen door, fanning herself with a magazine. "Emily, this isn't funny," Susan complained, her voice tight with irritation. "I tried to use the bathroom and nothing happened. You need to turn the water back on right now." "I can't do that, Susan," I answered casually, sitting down in one of the wooden rocking chairs. "The pipes are compromised. It's unlivable. You really shouldn't be here." "Sarah said we could stay," she snapped. "Sarah doesn't own this house," I countered smoothly. "I do. And as the owner, I am telling you, the house has no power, no internet, and no water. If you choose to stay in a sweltering, powerless box, that is your choice." Greg stormed over, his face flushed. "You're being completely unreasonable. We are family. You can't treat us like this." "You backed a trailer over my hydrangeas and moved into my house without asking." I pointed out, my voice never rising above a conversational tone. "I'm not treating you like anything. I'm just fixing my property." I pulled out my phone and texted a local contractor I had known for years. Hank owed me a favor from when I helped his daughter with a scholarship application. I asked if his demolition crew was free this afternoon. He replied instantly, "On our way, M." Inside the cabin, the temperature was steadily rising. The large windows, usually a blessing, were turning the living room into a greenhouse. I heard Susan groaning about the heat. Greg tried the kitchen faucet again, producing nothing but a dry squeak. They thought they had outsmarted a lonely old woman. But a house is only a home when it functions. Without electricity and water, it was just an expensive wooden oven. Then I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My son and daughter-in-law had arrived for the victory lap. David's sedan pulled in next to the U-Haul. Sarah stepped out first, wearing large sunglasses and holding a tray of expensive iced coffees. She looked ready for a relaxing weekend at the lake she felt she already owned. When she saw her parents sweating on the porch and me sitting calmly in the rocking chair, her smile vanished. "Mom, Dad." "Why is it 100 degrees in there?" Sarah demanded, marching up the steps. She glared at me. "Emily, what did you do?" "I'm doing maintenance," I replied, taking a sip of the water bottle I brought from my car. David walked up slowly, looking everywhere except at me. "Mom?" "Sarah said her parents just needed a place for a few weeks. I figured you wouldn't mind. You barely use this place." "You figured wrong, David," I stated. I held out my hand. "Give me your key." David blinked, startled. "What?" "Your key to my house. Hand it over." Sarah stepped between us. "No. He's your son. This is his inheritance. You can't just kick my parents out onto the street. We're staying, and you are going to turn the power back on right now." "I don't think I will." I smiled. Sarah pulled out her phone. "Fine. I'll call the utility company myself." I'll tell them I'm your daughter, and the shutoff was a mistake. I watched her dial. She held the phone to her ear, tapping her foot impatiently. A few seconds later, she looked at the screen confused. She tried again. "What's wrong with my phone?" she muttered. "There's no Wi-Fi," I explained. "And since this cabin is in a dead zone, the only way to get a cell signal is through the internet router, which is currently sitting in the trunk of my car." David finally looked at me, realizing I was holding all the cards. But he didn't realize I was already holding the one thing that actually mattered. Before Sarah could figure out how to find a cell signal, a massive rusted pickup truck roared down the driveway, followed by a white work van. Hank stepped out wearing heavily stained overalls and carrying a large sledgehammer. Two of his crew members followed hauling pry bars and a heavy air compressor. "Afternoon, Emily," Hank called out loudly. "Ready to tear this place apart?" Sarah froze. "Tear what apart?" "The guest bathroom and the hallway flooring." I answered, standing up. "I've been meaning to remodel for years. Today is demo day." "You can't do that," Greg yelled. "Our stuff is in there." "Then I suggest you move it," I noted calmly. "Hank, the guest wing is all yours." Hank didn't ask questions. He grinned, walked straight into the house, and within 2 minutes, the deafening sound of a sledgehammer smashing through ceramic tile echoed across the lake. The noise was incredible. Dust immediately began billowing out of the open front door. Susan started coughing violently, rushing out onto the porch. "My clothes! My bags are in there." "Hank works fast," I observed, watching the dust settle on Greg's leather recliner. "He's very thorough." Sarah turned on David, shoving his shoulder. "Do something! She's ruining our weekend." David looked at the dust, looked at Hank's crew tossing broken tiles out the window into a wheelbarrow, and then looked at me. "Mom, please, can we just talk about this?" "We are talking, David," I replied over the sound of tearing wood. "You gave away access to my property without my permission. Now I am improving my property. If Sarah's parents want to live in an active, powerless construction zone with no running water, they are welcome to stay." Sarah covered her ears, her face red with fury, finally realizing who held the hammer. Sarah stood over me, her fists clenched. "You are completely unhinged. You're doing this just to be cruel." "I'm doing this because it's my house," I corrected. "And speaking of things that are mine, we need to have a little financial chat." I reached into my bag and pulled out my iPad. I had downloaded some documents before I left the diner. I handed David a piece of paper. "What's this?" David asked, squinting in the harsh sunlight. "That is the phone bill. The one I have been paying for you and Sarah for the last 4 years." I explained. I tapped the screen on my tablet. "I just logged into the family account and removed both of your lines. Your service will end at midnight." Sarah gasped. "You canceled our phones?" "I also removed you from my auto insurance policy," I continued, ignoring her. "You're 32 years old, David. It's time you covered your own premiums." "Oh, and Sarah, I changed the passwords to the Netflix, the Amazon Prime, and the gate code to my primary residence. You won't be dropping by unannounced anymore." "You can't just cut us off," Sarah shrieked. "We rely on that money." "You rely on my money, yet you steal my cabin," I pointed out. "That's a very strange way to treat your bank." Greg and Susan emerged from the house covered in a fine layer of white drywall dust. Susan was crying, clutching a dirty blouse. The demolition noise inside was relentless. Boom, crack, shatter. "We can't stay in there." Greg coughed, glaring at David. "Do something, son." David looked completely defeated. He handed the phone bill back to me. "Mom, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have given her the code." I nodded slowly. "Apology accepted, David. But the renovations continue." By sunset, they wouldn't just be out of a cabin. They'd be completely disconnected. By 6 o'clock, the sun began to dip below the tree line, but the heat inside the cabin remained trapped. Hank and his crew finished their shift, leaving the guest wing completely stripped down to the wooden studs. They packed their trucks and waved goodbye, leaving an eerie, dusty silence behind. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on Sarah's parents. The house was pitch black. There was no water to wash the thick construction dust off their skin. The toilets were unusable. Susan sat on the edge of the U-Haul trailer, swatting at mosquitoes. "I am not sleeping in that disaster zone," she announced. "I need a shower. I need air conditioning." "We can just go to a hotel," Sarah offered, though her voice lacked confidence. "Who is paying for it?" Greg snapped. "We put our deposit money into moving here." They all turned to look at David. David checked his bank app on his phone, which was currently useless without Wi-Fi. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We don't have the budget for a long-term hotel right now, Sarah." Then make her pay for it." Sarah pointed at me. "She caused this." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm paying for a new bathroom. I'm not paying for your vacation." The fight drained out of Greg. The arrogance he had displayed that morning was completely gone, replaced by the uncomfortable reality of his own poor choices. He walked over to the trailer and started pulling the ramp down. "Start packing," Greg muttered to Susan. "We're leaving." "Dad, no," Sarah protested. "I am not using the woods as a bathroom." "Sarah," Greg barked. The trailer that took 3 hours to unpack took less than 40 minutes to load back up. I watched in silence as they hastily shoved their boxes and the heavy recliner back into the U-Haul. Sarah refused to look at me pacing near David's car with her arms crossed tight against her chest. David helped Greg lift the last mattress, his shoulders slumped in quiet embarrassment. When the trailer doors finally slammed shut, Greg walked toward his truck without a word. He didn't offer an apology, and I didn't expect one. Entitled people rarely apologize when they get caught. They only get angry that their plan failed. David lingered near my chair. "Mom, I really am sorry." "I know you are, David," I answered. "But being sorry doesn't fix the lock. You need to learn how to tell your wife, no." He nodded slowly, got into his car, and followed the U-Haul down the long gravel driveway. The moment their taillights vanished into the dark, I stood up and got to work. I took the heavy plastic sheeting and taped it over the doorway of the demolished guest room to contain the dust. Then I pulled the new smart locks out of my hardware bag. I spent the next hour unscrewing the old keypads and installing the new ones on the front and back doors. I programmed a completely new access code, one that David would never know. I walked to the utility box, removed the chain, and turned the water back on so I could finally wash my hands. I spent the night alone in the primary bedroom. The cabin smelled like sawdust and pine, but it was incredibly peaceful. Nobody was demanding anything from me. Nobody was treating me like a stepping stone. It was just a house, but it was mine, and I had finally scrubbed the disrespect from its walls. 3 weeks later, the cabin was fully transformed. Hank's crew finished the bathroom remodel, installing beautiful new tile and a modern walk-in shower. The dust was gone, the floors were polished, and the hydrangeas out front had mostly recovered from the U-Haul tires. I successfully rented the property to a lovely retired couple from Ohio. They signed a year-long lease, paid the deposit up front, and respected the space exactly as I had hoped. Life back in town changed significantly. David and Sarah had to adjust to their new reality. Without my financial cushion, Sarah had to pick up extra hours at her job, and they had to downgrade their phone plans. I heard through a mutual friend that her parents ended up renting a tiny apartment 2 towns over. David called me twice. The first time I let it go to voicemail. The second time I answered. He asked if we could meet up for dinner, just the two of us. We can meet for coffee at the diner, I offered gently. But you won't be coming to my house. He accepted the boundary without argument. It was a small step, but a necessary one. He was finally learning that a mother's love is unconditional, but a mother's resources and property are not. I occasionally sit on my back patio at home sipping coffee and enjoying the quiet morning air. I don't harbor any bitterness. Bitterness is a heavy thing to carry, and I refuse to carry extra weight for anyone. I learned that you don't need loud arguments to protect what is yours. You just need to know exactly what you control and have the courage to lock the door when people try to cross the line. Keep your boundaries clear, keep your keys in your pocket, and never let anyone make you a stranger in your own life. If there's one thing I took away from this whole ordeal, it's that keeping the peace shouldn't mean setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. For a long time as a mother and a widow, I thought my role was just to accommodate everyone else. But letting people walk all over you doesn't create peace. It just builds a mountain of resentment. You don't need to scream argue or hire a team of lawyers to protect your boundaries. Sometimes all it takes is a quiet decision, a change of locks, and the courage to stop funding the people who disrespect you. We spend so much of our lives nurturing our families, but at some point, we have to remember that we deserve a safe, peaceful space of our own too. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with entitled family members or deal with in-laws crossing boundaries? Let me know how you handled it down in the comments. I read every single one of them. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about people taking back control of their lives and standing their ground, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me bring more stories like this to you. Until next time, stay strong, trust your gut, and keep your boundaries clear.